paper is Tennyson's Unresolved Dilemma. In general, the Victorian era is viewed as a time period of change and inner turmoil. Every aspect of Victorian existence finds itself under the heavy scrutiny of the new mindset that sees far less value in the traditional and religious outlook of previous generations. By the Victorian era, the Anglican Church has totally lost the ability to provide a unifying atmosphere of spirituality in the face of new scientific discoveries. The inability of the Church to reconcile the heavenly and the earthly to provide a common spirituality to the English people left a void in their culture that allowed romantics to attempt to bridge the gap between the heaven and earth by finding the heavenly ideals in nature. According to Alison Krogh, Tennyson recognizes the precise nature of the romantic problem he has inherited. That is, all previous forms of religious experience are now tainted by the irrevocable dissociation of the heavenly and the earthly, the transcendent and the human. Tennyson believes that the ideals of the heavenly and the actions of the earthly rely on each other to unify and reinforce spirituality, and believes poetry and art may be the new medium to replace them, between them to replace the failing Anglican Church. Focusing on the poet's moral responsibilities to either art or humanity, Tennyson writes the poem, The Lady of Shalott. The poem ends with the central figure deciding against isolation in the pursuit of ideals and art in favor of the experience of humanity's acts of love and companionship. Apologize. The poem ends with the central figure deciding against isolation in the pursuit of ideals and art in favor of the experience of humanity's acts of love and companionship. And her death is used by Tennyson to express his failure in both reconciling heavenly ideals with earthly reality through the medium of poetry and resolving the issue of the artist's moral obligation to either art or society. The religious view of Christianity is that of a heaven and an earth, with heaven being a perfect place of existence, free from mortal worries and earthly existence. This is considered a Platonic relationship. According to Plato, there are two realms, the realm of ideal forms and the realm of reality. The realm of ideal forms is the realm of perfection, or heaven, and is the residence of ideal forms of all things found in the realm of reality. It is on this philosophy, similar to Plato's ideal realm and forms, that the New Testament theology of heaven and earth is based. The philosophy constitutes the idea in religion that humans are made in God's image, God being the ideal form of a human that resides in the ideal realm of heaven. Plato uses the cave allegory to explain how these separate realms work. The cave allegory states that people are in a cave and facing a wall with their heads constrained to keep them from looking around. Behind the people is a wall, and behind the wall is a giant fire that rises up to the ceiling. And between the wall and the fire is a walkway, where people carry characters that cast shadows on the wall the people are facing. These people can only see the shadows on the wall and believe that what they see is real. They do not realize that they only see shadows of what is real, or that the caricatures themselves are only representations of an ideal that can only be found by escaping the cave through a tunnel and moving out into the true light of the realm of ideals. In Christianity, the only human to experience both realms is Christ, who was sentenced to execution. And Christ, the fleshly incarnation of the ideal God, is not exactly human nor earthly. In this line of reasoning, only Christ has the possibility to actually experience both worlds simultaneously, and Tennyson believes that it is only through an institution dedicated to heavenly ideals that spirituality is possible for mortal human beings, leading him to the notion that art and artistic ideals are the institution that can bridge the gap. The Lady of Shalott is set on an isle in a river. The lady is embowered on the island by 4 gray walls and 4 gray towers, leading to the assumption that she is imprisoned there. Later in the poem, the reader learns that the lady is not necessarily being held against her will, but has been informed of a curse that will come upon her if she gets up from the loom, where she weaves her tapestry of the world she views through the mirror. The threat of an unknown and unexplained curse is what keeps the lady diligently at her loom, creating a tapestry of her interpretation of the outside world. The curse being referred to seems magical in nature, but it is actually a symbol for the potential loss of the artistic gift an artist may experience if he or she chooses to abandon isolation. Hanging on the wall is a mirror in which the lady can see shadows of the world appear. These shadows on the wall and the way the lady may not turn around and look directly out the window at reality are Tennyson making a clear connection to Plato's cave analogy. Isolated in the tower, the shadows she witnesses in the mirror are the images she weaves into her tapestry. Anne Coley points out that these images do not flow into one another, rather they live for a moment until they are replaced by others. As soon as the shepherd lad exits, the damsels arrive to occupy the space he had temporarily filled. The verses proceed as a procession, not a succession. This is a description of a poetic ideal. Ideals are fragmented and bear no common relation to other ideals, nor do they have any consequences in the real world. Take, for instance, the ideal of love that has no consideration for jealousy, deceit, or infidelity. The Lady of Shalott, locked away in her isolation, is able to represent ideal love in her tapestry from the broken images she witnesses in the mirror. By having the mirrored images early in the poem fragmented and processional, Tennyson is pointing out the difference between poetic ideals of love and love as an active human moral. With only the ideal to work with, her notion of love is fragmented and incomplete, like the mirror, and lacks the attribute of succession where the one act leads to another. Edgar Shannon states, on the island there is no activity, no conversation, no joy, just an immovable tower and an immovable island surrounded by a flowing river that symbolizes time and the way time and the outside world are passing the lady by. She views life but is unable to interpret it. This is how love is represented in art. In ideal love represented in art, there are no consequences or opportunities for infidelity or death. Love in art is timeless. Therefore, love in art is represented ideally and has no responsibility to the notions of succession, consequence, or time. The absence of moral acts of love and companionship, action, and joy on the stagnant island are what lead the lady to the lady's admission that she is half sick of shadows. Readers must remember that the lady is not actually in the realm of ideal forms or heaven, but is attempting to create an artistically ideal environment in isolation within the realm of reality. The next part of the poem describes a new fragment of what the lady sees in her mirror. A beautiful adorned knight, Sir Lancelot, arriving beside of the river on a magnificent steed and singing a Christian song. According to Taylor, Tennyson likes to use medieval tales, heroes, and settings to reference a former time period when questions like the crisis of faith and a loss of unified spirituality that plagued Victorian culture were not so prevalent. And Tennyson is using a character drawn from medieval tales because they represent that time period of stable and unified spirituality. This unification and stability of spirituality provided by the medieval Catholic Church is something that the Victorians, and especially Victorian artists in isolation, have a strong desire to achieve. Taylor points out that Tennyson was greatly affected by the Catholicism through the many Catholic members of the Cambridge Apostles who promoted a new type of Catholicism in England to replace what they considered the failed Anglican Church. Clearly, Tennyson sees the Catholic Church as being successful in ways the Anglican Church has not, especially in the unification of spirituality, and seeks to use figures of this golden age of the institution of church in juxtaposition with characters experiencing Victorian dilemmas. The description of Sir Lancelot is the most vivid and complete description in The Lady of Shalott. Everything from his garments, shield, armor, sword, brow, hair, and horse are addressed and given a glorious description. As readers, we are not given the lady's skin complexion, hair color, or even her dress style. This leads to the conclusion that it is not Sir Lancelot's beauty that attracts the lady and causes her to abandon her loom for acts of love and companionship, but the medieval knight's wholeness and completeness that compels her to bring the curse upon herself. The final part of The Lady of Shalott finds the lady outside the tower. It is at this point that the verses proceed as successional in the poem. This is because the lady has now left the tower and is once again susceptible to the flow of time and committing acts of love in a realm where actions have consequences. She comes down from the tower, finds a boat, writes her name on the boat, and sets the boat floating down the river where she sings her final song and dies. Many scholars have placed emphasis on the fact that the lady dies before she reaches Camelot. There may be significance in the way the lady dies before reaching Camelot, but the fact that she has left the stagnant tower and has become susceptible to the real-world flow of time leaves only one certain conclusion to the lady's life: death. It is not so unusual for any human being to pass away from life before reaching the goals and objectives they have set for themselves, much like Tennyson died without ever solving the problem of whether the poet's primary moral obligation is to art and poetry or to society and the experience of humanity. This question is left unanswered in the poem as well as in the author's own personal life. What many scholars also find peculiar is Lancelot's perceived indifference to the lady's death in the final lines of the poem. All the others in Camelot are distraught at the sight of the dead lady in the boat, while Lancelot has a much different reaction. The poem states, "But Lancelot mused a little space. He said she had a lovely face. God in his mercy lend her grace." The indifference perceived in Lancelot's response at the end of the poem should not be treated too harshly. As stated earlier in the essay, Lancelot is given the most complete description of any character in the poem. And this wholeness and completeness are what attracted the lady to him so strongly to begin with. Lancelot, as the representative of whole and complete spirituality, is totally comfortable with the notion of death because he has a more complete faith and spirituality provided by the institution of the medieval Catholic Church. He mused a little space, meaning he thought before he spoke. And in the wholeness of his spirituality that has total faith in both realms, he decides that if God in his mercy lends her grace, then she is in a better place. The death of the central character in The Lady of Shalott and Sir Lancelot's reaction to that death are not trivial, but an inescapable part of life that should be interpreted as an admission by Tennyson that he can neither solve the problem of the artist's responsibility to society nor reconcile the heavenly ideals with earthly reality through the use of poetry and art as a medium. The inner turmoil and uncertainness felt by the populace living in the Victorian era is represented in the failed attempt at a reconciled spirituality in Tennyson's Lady of Shalott, and is a direct result of the declining influence of the Anglican Church as a medium between heavenly ideals and earthly reality. Just as disturbing is the observation of the accuracy of Tennyson's belief that to reestablish a medium would be the only way to restore that lost spirituality, and how the church as an institution and humanity's concern with spirituality has continued to decline after the Victorian era and through the 20th century. Thank you.